The thing we pride ourselves on is presenting a whole gamut of information, articles for the scientists, but plenty for the layman. And we try to make complicated scientific things more simple and understandable for the public.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore, and this is episode 95, a special bonus episode. This one features highlights from the Weston A. Price Summer Journal. You all have no idea, but we're trying to give you one, about how replete these journals are with amazing, applicable, relevant, and scientific health information. This summer's journal was no exception, so we tried to boil it down to a few highlights that might benefit you. We discuss synthetic vitamins versus those that are naturally occurring in our food. We talk about the importance of sulfur for the heart and how to help your body produce more of it. We even touch on CRISPR, that new genome editing tool. So stay tuned, get ready to geek out, but also get practical tips for improving your health. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Thank you, Hilda. It's always great to be back. This is becoming a really nice tradition.
I know, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And I know everyone else is as well. So today is the day when we are going to look at that summer journal and kind of touch on the highlights. The journal is a quarterly publication that we send out to all of the members of the foundation. And it's so rich and full of valuable information, isn't it?
Yes, it really is, Hilda. And the thing we pride ourselves on is presenting a whole gamut of information, articles for the scientists, but plenty for the layman. And we try to make complicated scientific things more simple and understandable for the public.
I love that. There are even little summary bars, I think, where they try to condense down the information that can be somewhat intellectual and bring it down to a level where most of us can understand it.
Right. So for the real science articles, you can just read the summaries.
Yes, thank goodness. Okay, so let's get into it, though. So one of my favorite columns is your caustic commentary, where you address things that are out in the world of science that are affecting our diet and nutrition. Let's take it with that first topic that you touched on about breakfast cereals. There was a study done on that, and what did it find?
Well, this was very interesting to me because one of the things I talk about is the fact that so little research has been done on extruded grains. You know, these are the breakfast cereals like Corn Flakes and Cheerios, and even things like Doritos are made by this extrusion process. This puts a lot of high temperature, high pressure on the grains to form these cereals. And we do know that this process renders a lot of the proteins in the grains very toxic, especially neurotoxic, toxic to the nervous system. And I suspect this is one of the reasons we're seeing so many problems in grains today. Well, there was an article out just recently, 2016, one of the few published articles about the effects of extrusion on grains. Mm-hmm. And guess what? The extruded breakfast cereals really mess up the gut flora. Not just the gut flora, but the colon flora. And when you're eating these extruded grains, you have lower levels of lactobacillus that produce lactic acid and the bacteria that produce the beneficial butyric acid in the colon. So again, it's starting to add up that these breakfast cereals are really not a good idea. And as a matter of fact, I just read in the paper this morning that consumption of breakfast cereals has gone way down, and with it, the consumption of pasteurized milk. Pasteurized milk consumption has declined 14% in just the last few years, and they say one of the reasons is people aren't eating the breakfast cereal. So.
Well, that's encouraging because I think of breakfast cereal as the typical American breakfast.
Yes. And basically, you're starting your child off to school with nothing in his stomach. They're very poor in nutrients, and they're very high in things that can cause allergic reactions, neurological problems, tummy aches. It's just not a good breakfast.
But you know, Sally, on all the breakfast cereal boxes, it says vitamins added, and it shows all the nutrient content, making it seem like it's really good for you.
Well, right. And of course, they say, the vitamins are added before the extrusion, and the extrusion probably really messes up those vitamins if they were any good for you in the first place. Weston Price had his falling out with the establishment when he was asked to endorse Wonder Bread with added vitamins. And he said he would not do that because he did not believe that the artificially produced vitamins were the same as what's in the real food.
Right. And scientists who study this know that the natural vitamins are different than the synthetic ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Our bodies process them differently. So really good point. So, I hope people will take this to heart and change their breakfast patterns.
And in traditional cultures, and this pattern is found all over the world, grains were prepared with very great care. They were basically fermented. They were soaked and soured either to make sour porridges or sourdough bread. And this process not only got rid of a lot of the toxins in grains, but greatly increased the vitamin content, the B vitamins, and kind of liberates the minerals that are there so they're more available.
Well, for example, I think in Europe, muesli was really popular, like almost a granola type breakfast, right? But we've gotten away from how it was traditionally prepared, and people started making shortcuts, and they were losing that kind of pre-digestion that takes place when things are prepared properly.
Right. They were telling people to eat it raw. And the oatmeal in Scotland and other parts of the world was soaked overnight and often allowed to ferment for several days before they actually ate it. So when people started eating these grains raw or not well cooked or not properly prepared, that's when we started to see all the problems with grains that people are suffering from today.
Wow. Now, something else you touched on in your caustic commentary article was about the CRISPR, and this is that DNA modifier. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Well, the genetic modification people are bragging about this new method for creating genetically modified organisms, and it's said to precisely alter the DNA for gene editing. And they did a study recently. They were trying to correct a gene that causes blindness in mice, so-called gene. And what they found was when they used this CRISPR technology, they got more than 100 unexpected deletions and insertions in the genetic code.
So more than 100.
More than 100. So it was not precise. And they did have a whole bunch of unexpected consequences from it. What's most interesting to me is that they're calling blindness in the mice a genetic disease. And we know very well that blindness usually is caused by vitamin A deficiency. And really the solution to so many of these problems that they're trying to find these expensive genetic solutions for is so simple. It's nutrition. It's eating a very nutrient-dense, high vitamin A diet in preparation for pregnancy and during pregnancy, and then the blindness does not occur.
What's coming through my mind is that if you increase people's nutrition, get them more vitamin A, there's no money to be made in that. Right, exactly. And it's just not as sexy. You don't have that nice little CRISPR DNA splitter thing, right?
Yeah, right. And then I always try to keep our readers up to date on vitamin A research because vitamin A is horribly maligned. And a new study has shown that vitamin A plays a really essential role in the hippocampus in the brain, which is needed for learning and memory, and the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus keeps the body in balance, temperature, controls weight, food intake, and many other roles. But most importantly, for me, the hypothalamus is the seat of impulse control. And when you have a good functioning hypothalamus supported by lots of vitamin A, you're calm. You don't fly off the handle. You can concentrate. If you're a child, you can concentrate in school, and you can deal with stress and inconvenience and discomfort because you have a really good hypothalamus, and vitamin A is critical to that process.
Yeah, when somebody cuts me off in traffic and I see like their horrible expression and they're mad or rushed, I just yell out my window, take in more vitamin A.
Yeah, right. Right. And of course, vitamin A is in all the foods that we're being told not to eat. Liver, butter, cream, especially from pastured animals. It's in seafoods, it's in egg yolks, and it's in cod liver oil.
I was jesting, a moment ago about the person cutting me off in traffic, but the truth is, I see it in you. I see it in so many of my friends. I see it in myself that when we eat this way, we are more calm. We are less irritated. We are less edgy and nervous.
Right. And that makes for a wonderful world when people can solve their problems in a calm way. Mm-hmm. It's not that this nutrition is going to solve all our problems, but it will support the kind of thinking that we need to solve our problems.
Well said. Very well said. Let's dive into some of the other articles that are in the journal, Sally. I think there was one written by Stephanie Seneff, right? She's the MIT scientist.
Right. She helped develop the voice recognition and voice coding for GPS systems.
Wow.
So she's a brilliant scientist, and now she's turned her attention to nutrition, and especially the mineral sulfur. And this article focuses on how important sulfur is for the heart and the arteries. And the first thing I learned in this article that kind of has me floored is that, the action of sunlight on our skin, we think that's to create vitamin D, and it does create vitamin D. But the most important role of sunlight on the skin is to create cholesterol sulfate, which is a combination of cholesterol and sulfur, obviously. Mm-hmm. And cholesterol sulfate is water-soluble and goes through the blood. It doesn't need to be in the lipoproteins, the LDL and the HDL. Cholesterol sulfate is extremely important for the functioning of the heart and the arteries. And in the arteries, cholesterol sulfate creates kind of film of electrical charges that allow the blood cells to go through the tiny veins and the tiny arteries. It just slide through. Mm-hmm. And that's what cholesterol sulfate does. So it's extremely important. We need to be getting plenty of sulfur in our diets from things like egg yolks and meat, organ meats. She recommends Epsom salt baths, which have a lot of magnesium and sulfur in them. But she also is, a strong proponent of getting out in the sun all the time, as much as you can, and not using sunscreen.
I feel like the U.S. has promoted sunscreen all around the world. I saw pictures recently of some friends of mine who went on a work trip to Guatemala, and they were slathering their Guatemalan friends with sunscreen. No. They were. And I was thinking, is that really good?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. And, what protects our skin is eating a lot of saturated fat. Mm. We're eating a lot of unsaturated fats, and they get built into the cell membrane, especially in the skin. They become oxidized by sunlight. But if you are eating saturated fat, that's very stable. And if that's in your skin, you're going to be fine. So the sunscreen is blocking a lot of very important processes. I know that in the South Seas, the natives felt that sunlight on the skin, if you put coconut oil on your skin, the sunlight created nutrients. It kind of fed you. And it's certainly creating the cholesterol sulfate, which is so important for cardiovascular function. And there's a sidebar here in the article, which I really like. It's called Pathology or Therapy. So it lists things that we think are pathologies that we have to fight, but she's saying these are therapies. So, for example, inflammation in the arteries is actually a way of releasing cholesterol sulfate. The atheroma in the arteries stores cholesterol sulfate so it can be there if it's needed. The Clostridia pneumonia, this microbe, gets into the artery walls, and it provides something called heparin sulfate to the heart. So this Clostridia, which is considered a pathology, is actually the body's therapy for your heart, and we shouldn't be taking antibiotics to get rid of it. And finally, the heart attack itself, she said, the complex cascade that takes place during a heart attack appears to be aimed at producing sulfate by oxidizing taurine molecules that are stored in the highest concentration in the heart. Basically, what she's saying is that the heart attack, rather than being an attack on your heart, is a way of releasing sulfur for your heart. And it's like a life-saving thing for you. It's not something that the body is doing to kill you.
That is so interesting and so radical from what we've been
it is very
hearing
radical.
All these years. Wow.
Well, you hear a lot of radical things in our journal, right?
That is fascinating. And I was thinking of a correlation. If I have an injury and there is swelling in the area, that's something people might say, oh, that's a pathology, right? That's a problem. So take something to make the swelling go down. But maybe it's actually my body trying to, as someone put it recently, put up construction cones and say this little area needs help. And the body is actually doing something to make it better.
Oh, absolutely. And Tom Cowan talks about this a lot. He says that the inflammation is a therapy. For example, if you get a splinter in your finger, it inflames around the finger. And for one thing, that keeps you from using your finger because it's too painful. But it also brings a lot of white blood cells in, cushions the injury. It brings in cholesterol so the injury can heal. And without inflammation, we wouldn't make it very far. Inflammation is our friend. We just don't want inflammation to go on longer than it's supposed to go on.
Right. So I'm just making the parallel with the heart, that these things that we think are problematic have a purpose, which is really cool to think about.
Yes. And, same with the childhood diseases, things like measles, which we now are treating as pathology. The measles is very important for children to get. It kind of primes the immune system, protects them against cancer later in life. Same with whooping cough. Kids who get whooping cough are highly protected against asthma later in life.
And yet we try to shield them. Sometimes it seems like we're talking about these diseases like, oh my gosh, never should we get the measles. And
the truth is that these are like initiations for the child and tests and challenges for the immune system. And of course, we need to know how to take care of the child when they're going through this. But they're important for health right throughout life.
Yeah, it reminds me of physical training. I teach exercise classes, so sometimes it's hard to do a few push-ups, but the more I challenge my body, the more it can step up to that next challenge, right? So that's what we're about. We're trying to train our bodies to defend themselves and be strong should another more serious disease come across our path.
Yes, exactly.
Coming up, Sally discusses vitamin D supplementation, what the Feingold diet is, and a surprising reason why C-sections are on the rise. Hey, and I want to tell you about two important things that are coming up. One is a chance to give us your feedback. What do you love about the show? What could we improve? What topics do you want to see covered in the future? Go to our website, westanaprice.org, and look for the podcast survey to tell us exactly what you think. The button is on the homepage. Also, did you know that this podcast has been going for about 1.5 years? We need your help to keep it going. The foundation is a nonprofit that is member supported, and the only way to keep Wise Traditions on the air is with your help. We've set a goal of $15,000 by the end of October that we'd love to raise. If every listener hearing my voice just now gave $10, we could easily make this goal, if not exceed it. So please be a part of this drive and don't wait until October 31st. Look for the donate button on our website and give today. Thanks in advance. Well, I'm thinking of another article that you touch on here in the journal. It was about vitamin D deficiency. I think this is really important to talk about because I understand most of the population in the U.S. now is vitamin D deficient.
Well, that's a big question. The real question is, should we be taking vitamin D supplements? And so a lot of people are taking these vitamin D supplements, and they're getting their vitamin D levels tested. And Pam Schoenfeld, the author of this article, just raises some red flags about this. First of all, the big question people have is, what should my vitamin D levels be in my blood? And what you get depends on the type of test you take. So, who knows what the best type of test is, but she comes up with the number 30. 30 is the number that protects you against osteoporosis, osteopenia. So, you want to have a level of about 30 in your blood, but some people are getting very high levels. Some doctors are recommending they take a lot of supplemental D to get, your vitamin D levels over 50 or even over 80. And there's a certain amount of evidence that indicates that is actually not a good idea.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
we don't really know, but it doesn't correlate with good outcomes. Let's put it like that. And people are taking, 1,000 units. Some people are taking 5,000 units even every day. And what we know at the Weston A. Price Foundation is that vitamin D always has to be balanced with vitamin A, or that vitamin D is going to be toxic. And basically, the vitamin D will cause calcification of the soft tissues, things like kidney stones, when you get too much vitamin D and not enough vitamin A. But that's unfortunately how people are taking vitamin D today.
Interestingly, vitamin D and vitamin A come together in some foods naturally, right?
Exactly. In animal fats, in egg yolks, in butter. Of course, we recommend cod liver oil with the right ratios of A and D. They come together, and that's the way they're supposed to be in nature. But, it's like people do all these things that they think are really good for them. So they're taking huge amounts of vitamin D. They're taking fish oil, which, of course, we don't recommend. They are doing really punishing exercise that maybe might be too stressful for them. And they're eating lean meat. So a lot of things that are being promoted as very, conventional, latest advice, we are very concerned about.
Yeah, people need to stay informed. That's why I like that education is one of the core tenets of the Weston A. Price Foundation, like to really let people get to the meat of what's going on. No food, pun intended.
Yes, and we also like to be very practical. In general, we don't push people into supplements. I mean, there are exceptions, and of course, one of these is cod liver oil, but we consider that a food, not a supplement. But the synthetic, isolated vitamins, I think they're always going to cause a problem. Now, vitamin D, it's normally vitamin D3 that's given. But Hilda, there's over 1,000 forms of vitamin D.
Oh. And I had no
idea. And when you're eating your foods with vitamin D in them, you'll get those forms.
In a much more bioavailable way. I've heard that sometimes they've done studies and they've found that some of these synthetic vitamins actually just go through you. They don't even have the good effect that you hope.
Yeah, they make expensive urine.
Exactly.
And by the way, Dr. Price in his book mentions a study done way back in the 1930s where they were giving synthetic vitamin D to pregnant women. Now, this was vitamin D2, mind you, which most people consider not a good idea. But the babies had the calcification of the fontanelle in the top of the skull, and the mothers had calcification of the placenta. So neither of those is a good thing.
Right now. So even back then, they were onto the fact that a D supplement might not be the best thing to do.
Yeah. An interesting study with lifeguards in Israel in the sun all the time. They found that they had a lot of kidney stones.
Oh.
So even the natural vitamin D that they're getting from sunlight, if it's not balanced with adequate vitamin A, it's going to cause problems.
Well, that is a great word of caution as we are rounding out our summer. I hope to get this episode out soon so people can apply it. Is there anything else that you want to highlight from the journal, Sally? This time has gone so quickly.
I know. Well, there's a nice article on the Feingold diet, and she's calling it the gateway to the Wise Traditions diet. Parents see how better their children behave if they just eliminate the artificial colors and flavorings and so forth. And then they might realize, but there's some other ways they can make improvements.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, I do recommend if people want the whole story, and they really should get it, they just can become members of the foundation. And for $40 for a regular membership, they can get this on a quarterly basis and really get to dig deep into the content and hold on to it so they can share it.
Yes. By the way, one of the articles was about the prevalence of cesarean sections today and why they're so prevalent. And she talks about the shape of the pelvic opening. Dr. Price wrote about this in his book, actually. So the children born with narrow faces and crowded and crooked teeth, the girls tend to have narrow pelvic opening, and childbirth becomes very, very difficult for them.
So there's a little bit of everything in this journal, it sounds like.
Actually, one of my favorite sections of the journal, Hilda, is at the end, the advertising section. We call it the shop heard around the world, like the shop heard around the world.
Yes, it's cute.
And it's a really cute old-fashioned advertising section.
Oh, yeah, and there are all kinds of resources. Yeah, this is fantastic. Well, Sally, you are actually our personal resource, and I was so glad we got to talk today. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, and we'll talk again. I'm just about to start on fall 2017, so we'll talk about that one when it comes out.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks again, Sally.
Thanks, Hilda.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this bonus episode. If you want to support the work of the foundation, don't walk to your computer and go to westonaprice.org. Click on the button that says Become a Member. You will receive the quarterly journal that we've discussed today, along with a helpful shopping guide. You'll also have the satisfaction of knowing that you are supporting the foundation's work of education, research, and activism. And for highlights from today's episode, just go to the show notes for episode 95 on the podcast page of the westonaprice.org website. And while you're there, don't forget to take our podcast survey and or give a donation to support the show. It couldn't be simpler, really, and it would mean a lot. Just click on the button on the homepage or on the podcast page to give us your feedback and or a donation. Thank you.